Welcome to Thread of Terror. We bring you the creepiest stories from Reddit. Dim the lights, grab a blanket, and hit subscribe so you never miss a scare. What has been your most spine-tingling, bone-chilling? I have a bad feeling about this experience. What happened? Story 1. The Stranger's Song.
It was a quiet evening, and the streets were unusually empty as I walked home from the bus stop, music blasting in my headphones. The familiar rhythm calmed me, drowning out the stillness of the night. But halfway home, the battery in my headphones died, plunging me into an unsettling silence. That was when I heard him, a deep, raspy voice, muttering just loud enough to reach me. I can never get women to talk to me. The words sent a cold shiver down my spine. I turned my head slightly, stealing a glance over my shoulder. He was there, alone. His heavy steps echoed mine, and he was unmistakably following me. My stomach sank as I recognized him. He had gotten off the same bus as me, a man easily twice my size. How long had he been trailing me? I tried to keep calm. With my now silent headphones still on, I pretended not to hear him and picked up my pace. But so did he. Then he started singing. Speak to the girl. You got to speak to the girl. His voice was hoarse, the sing-song tone making the words even more sinister. He repeated it over and over, each time louder, more insistent, as though the words themselves would close the distance between us. I could hear his breathing now, heavy and deliberate, almost in sync with his menacing chant. My mind raced. I could not go home. If I led him there, he would know where I lived. The thought made my blood run cold. I spotted a side street leading to a busy area and veered sharply, hoping to find safety in numbers. But as I turned, I saw his shadow stretch and follow mine. He was not giving up. Ahead, a faint neon glow beckoned. A pub, its dim light promising a sliver of safety. Heart pounding, I darted inside and made a beeline for the bar, my voice trembling as I begged the bartender to pretend we were friends. Without missing a beat, the bartender stepped around the counter, his presence a wall between me and the man. He pulled me into a warm, protective hug, speaking loudly and casually, as if greeting an old friend. The door creaked open behind me, and I did not need to look to know the man had followed me in. His eyes burned into my back. The bartender's cheerful facade did not falter, though his grip on my shoulder tightened. Slowly the man lingered, then turned and left. I stayed there for what felt like hours, shaken to my core. Even now I hear his voice in my nightmares, singing that terrible, haunting line. Speak to the girl. You got to speak to the girl. Not all heroes wear capes, but some save lives behind a bar.
Story 2. Blind Date.
Years ago, I had one of the most bone-chilling experiences of my life during a blind date. A former friend, without asking me, set me up with a firefighter co-worker of her boyfriend. I decided to meet him at a familiar, busy sports bar-style restaurant. I always paid for myself, so I chose a place that was within my budget. We introduced ourselves and immediately I felt reservations. He was intimidating in a way that was difficult to describe, and I am not someone who gets easily intimidated. That was the first red flag. However, naive as I was back then, I told myself not to judge someone too quickly. a lesson I later learned to trust. Your gut instincts are there for a reason. As we started talking, he revealed that he was separated with 2 children and working on a divorce. I thought, okay, that is understandable. Marriages do not always work out. But then he mentioned that his estranged wife had an order of protection against him. At that moment, the red flags were practically raining down like confetti. It got worse. He went on to explain that it was her fault he had to hit her because something she had done made him angry. I was frozen in discomfort and fear. The food had not even arrived, and I was already considering how to excuse myself. The only thing stopping me from leaving was the fear that this man might follow me out into the parking lot. He continued to talk, and I decided to stay calm and play along. I told him I had to be at work very early the next morning, hoping to end the evening as quickly as possible. At one point, he said I was such a good listener and that he wished more women were like me. Internally, I wanted to scream, "No, buddy, you terrify me, and I just want to get out of here alive." When the date finally ended, I declined his offer to walk me to my car. Thankfully, I had parked close to the restaurant, while he had parked far away on the opposite side. I got to my car, started it, and had not even pulled out of the parking space when I received a text from him asking for another date. I did not respond. The next day at work, he texted me all day. I could not have responded, even if I had wanted to. Then came the message that truly terrified me. He claimed to have police officer friends who could track my phone number to find my address. And he threatened to show up at my home if I did not reply. That was my breaking point. I do not take kindly to threats, and this was no exception. Fortunately, I worked closely with the state police, so I showed them the texts. They took the situation seriously. I also contacted my phone carrier and immediately had my number changed. This experience remains the most unnerving of my life. To this day, I get chills thinking about how dangerous that encounter could have been.
Story 3. Warning in the dark.
It was a long, exhausting day at university, and all I wanted was to get home and rest. I was driving through the quiet streets of Mexico, the fading light casting eerie shadows across the road. As I approached a red light, I noticed an SUV pull up beside me. The driver, an ordinary-looking woman with a small child strapped in the back seat, motioned for me to roll down my window. I hesitated but complied. Her voice was calm, almost too kind. She told me, "There's some liquid leaking from your car. You should stop and check it out before it gets worse." I nodded, thanked her, and rolled the window back up. For a brief moment, I thought about pulling over immediately, but then it hit me. An icy chill ran down my spine, as if unseen hands had gripped my shoulders. My arms felt heavy, my legs rooted to the floor of the car. A voice in the back of my mind screamed, "Keep driving. Don't stop." I shook off the unease, chalking it up to exhaustion, and decided to head straight home. "I'll check the car when I get there," I told myself, though I couldn't shake the oppressive feeling that lingered in the air. When I finally pulled into the driveway, I stepped out and inspected the car. Not a single drop of liquid. No leaks, no spills. Nothing at all to suggest something was wrong. A wave of relief washed over me, but unease still lingered in the back of my mind. That night, while watching the news with my parents, my blood turned cold. A story flashed on the screen about a couple who had been stopped under eerily similar circumstances. Someone had told them their car was leaking, convincing them to pull over. When they did, armed men emerged from the shadows, stole their car, and shot them in the legs to buy time for their escape. I couldn't breathe. My mind raced back to that woman and her child. Were they part of something sinister? I replayed the moment over and over, imagining what might have happened if I'd stopped. Even now, I can't explain the sensation that stopped me from pulling over. But every time I think about it, I feel that same chill crawling down my spine. Sometimes, listening to your gut is the only thing standing between you and a nightmare.
Story 4. Call with danger.
After graduating high school, I worked at a video rental store in a strip mall in a small town. We stayed open late and after 9 p.m. Or so all of the other businesses in the strip mall were closed, leaving my store lit up like a beacon in the darkness. Because the store was struggling financially, the last 2 hours of the shift was spent with the closing employee alone. I was just a 19-year-old girl, and it always worried me that someone might try to rob us. It would have been an easy target, but I just kept going. There were apartments behind the store, so we had regular customers who we knew well. They would cut through the parking lot to go to various places in the mall. It wasn't uncommon for them to wave at me or come inside just to say hello or browse. It was a laid-back place. One night, I was closing the store as usual, doing the tills and cleaning up. When I walked to the front, I saw 2 regulars standing on the other side of the locked entrance. They were smiling and waving, mouthing hi and things like that. I waved back and kept working, but then I noticed something strange. These guys weren't doing anything. They were just standing there, talking right outside the door. Eventually, the time came for me to leave. I had finished all my work, and it had been about 30 minutes since I first saw them on camera. They were still just hanging out in the parking lot, surrounded by nothing but closed businesses. It was around 11:30 p.m. Everything was shut down, and the place was empty. I was familiar with these guys, but I would have to walk past them to get to my car, and something about the whole situation just felt off. I thought it would be best to play it safe. I called my boyfriend, now my husband, and told him I had a strange feeling. I asked if he could come to the store so I could get to my car safely. As soon as he pulled up, he got out of his car, walked up to the store, greeted the 2 guys, and waited for me. The guys turned around and walked away toward the apartments behind the store. I thought that was odd, but didn't think much of it at the time. I went home and put it out of my mind. About a week later, I heard a huge news story. One of the guys had been arrested for trying to kidnap a jogger at a local park. In his bag, there were rope, duct tape, and a knife. It made big headlines. I also found out that he had been arrested years earlier for burning down a historic cabin in town. The guy he was with was a registered sex offender. It's been about 15 years since then, and I still shudder to think about what could have happened if I hadn't trusted that feeling in the back of my mind that night.
Story 5. Predicted a tragedy.
I woke up in a panic early one weekend morning, my heart pounding as though I had just been jolted awake from a nightmare. It felt like my body was in overdrive. Prickles of cold sweat ran down my spine, and my hands trembled as I reached for my phone. I had been in the deepest sleep, but something wasn't right. I felt a sense of urgency, as if a switch had flipped in my mind, triggering my fight or flight response. I wasn't sure why, but it was as if I had been pulled from a dream, only to find myself wide awake in a world that felt wrong. When I unlocked my phone, I saw a text from my best friend, sent just hours earlier in the middle of the night. The message was filled with strange, sentimental words. It didn't seem to make sense, and I felt an immediate wave of dread wash over me. The text was so out of character, like a final goodbye wrapped in melancholy. Something deep inside me told me that something was terribly wrong. I wasn't even fully conscious of the steps I was taking, but within minutes, I was out the door, rushing to his house. As I drove, my thoughts raced. Why was I so certain? What had I missed? The feeling of dread gnawed at me as I drove through the quiet streets. I tried calling him, but there was no answer. The empty sound of the phone ringing echoed in my ears. When I arrived at his place, I barely took in the scene. His house was eerily quiet, and I didn't even stop to think about the front door being unlocked. It just added to the sense of unease I couldn't shake. I walked in, calling his name softly at first, then louder as I made my way through the house. The silence was deafening, and a dark thought crept into my mind. What if I'm too late? And then I saw him. He was in his room, and the sight of him sent a chill through my veins. He hadn't succeeded, but it was clear that he had tried. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut, and everything felt blurry for a moment. I could see the pain and hopelessness in his eyes, the hurt so deep it was almost suffocating. But I didn't let myself break down. I moved quickly, intervening just enough to stop him from completing what he had started. I didn't know how long I stayed with him, talking, comforting, doing whatever I could to keep him from slipping further into despair. I just knew that I couldn't leave him like that I had to stay. The weight of it all was almost too much, but I held it together. Eventually, he calmed down. We talked, and he finally let me in on how overwhelmed and lost he had been. But as terrifying as that moment was, there was a glimmer of hope amidst the darkness. He wasn't alone anymore. I stayed by his side, and we made sure he got the support he needed, step by step. Now, years later, he's a completely different person. He's finished his master's degree and is now pursuing a career in medical school. He's thriving, living a life that I didn't think would be possible back then. When I think back on that night, I can still feel the terror of it, but I also see how far he's come. The weight of that moment shaped us both, but it also showed me that sometimes just being there at the right time can make all the difference in the world.
Story 6. Pool's Changing Room.
One afternoon during my university days, I went to a local swimming pool to swim. After finishing, I walked into the empty changing rooms, the silence almost eerie. The lights buzzed overhead, and the floor tiles gleamed under the harsh light. I found an empty cubicle and began to change, the solitude a welcome break. But as I started undressing, I heard the sound of footsteps. Someone had entered the cubicle directly next to mine. At first, I thought little of it. There were plenty of other cubicles available. But then, a strange unease settled over me. Why choose the one right next to me when the others were free? My heart began to race. a gut feeling telling me something wasn't quite right. Paranoia? Maybe, but I couldn't shake it. Quietly, I picked up my things and moved to a cubicle further away, trying to shake the unsettling feeling. A few moments later, I heard footsteps again. The same person had moved to the cubicle next to mine. My chest tightened. This wasn't normal. There was something off about the situation. I stayed as still as I could, hoping they would leave. But the silence between us was deafening. No rustling towels, no shifting in the cubicle, no sounds of anyone getting dressed. It was like they weren't even changing. My unease intensified, and I felt a chill run through me. At this point, my instinct screamed at me to do something. I pulled out my mobile phone, pretending to scroll, but my mind wasn't on distractions. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. I knew I had to confirm what was happening. I made a casual motion, as though adjusting my swimming bottoms, and looked under the cubicle divider. My stomach dropped. There, under the gap, was a man's hand holding a mobile phone. The camera aimed directly at me. My blood ran cold. Panic surged through me. I quickly grabbed my phone and called the police, explaining what had happened. They arrived soon after, and the man was arrested. It turns out he had done the same thing to at least one other young woman. But the horror didn't stop there. This man was a regular at the pool, and the staff knew him because he brought his young daughter there for swimming lessons. The thought that he had been preying on unsuspecting women, all while hiding behind the guise of being a father, made my skin crawl. That day changed something in me. I learned to trust my instincts, no matter how small the feeling, because sometimes the darkest danger hides in plain sight.
Story 7. Midnight Urge.
It was New Year's Eve many years ago, a time for celebration. But for some reason, something felt off. My girlfriend and I had plans to spend the night at our former roommate's new place. They were a gay couple, and back then, it wasn't as widely accepted as it is today, but they were always warm and welcoming to us. As the night progressed, I couldn't shake the strange feeling creeping over me. An hour before midnight, an overwhelming urge hit me, one I couldn't ignore. I needed to leave. It was a gut feeling, something primal. But when I tried to explain it to my girlfriend, she wasn't having it. She wanted to stay and ring in the new year, as we had planned. We argued for what felt like forever, my anxiety growing with every minute. Finally, I got my way, and we left in such a hurry that we even forgot our blankets and pillows. The smallest details not even crossing my mind as we rushed out. We drove home, trying to shake off the tension between us, but the feeling lingered. The night felt far from over, and my thoughts kept going back to our friends. Something just didn't sit right. Hours later, in the dead of night, we woke to sirens wailing in the distance. At first, we thought nothing of it, until we heard the news. Someone had set our friend's house on fire. The flames had consumed everything. Both of our friends gone, just like that. I couldn't shake the nagging suspicion. The night before, one of our friends had mentioned someone had come by looking for pills. They were rudely turned away, but something in my gut told me that wasn't the end of it. I hadn't seen the person's face, too distracted by the chaos of the night. But deep down, I knew I knew in my bones that the person who had been turned away was the one who'd come back and burned it all down. I'll never forget that feeling of dread, the sense that somehow I'd missed something important. And now, I'll never be able to shake the thought that I could have stopped it if I'd paid closer attention.
Story 8. Waiting for me.
It was about 9 or 10 in the evening, and I was heading home from a really bad date. It was a 10-minute walk from where I was to my home, and as I stopped by a red light, I waited. It was the middle of the week, and during my walk from the date to the red light, I had encountered maybe one person. The streets were nearly deserted. Out of nowhere, an intense and unshakable feeling washed over me. I knew someone was watching me. I turned around, and there he was, a man standing uncomfortably close. He noticed that I had seen him and immediately started talking about how nice the summer rain was. I ignored him and began walking, even though the light was still red. He followed. I sped up, and so did he. My body went into fight, flight, or freeze mode, and out of nowhere, I stopped walking. He seemed caught off guard, taking a few more steps before stopping himself. He asked me why I'd stopped, and I almost yelled at him, telling him that I did not want to talk to him, that his behavior was scaring me, and to leave me alone. He argued back, but I yelled again, just go. This time he began walking away, slowly. I stayed rooted to the spot, watching him until he stopped near a bus stop. For a moment, I exhaled, thinking he was waiting for a bus. But right next to the bus stop was a dark alley, and beyond that, an even darker parking lot. He was not leaving, he was waiting for me. The unease in my stomach grew. I tried calling a friend, but there was no answer. I hid behind some construction materials and tried again. On the third attempt, I managed to get through. But my friend was not home and could not help. She asked if anyone else was nearby, and I said no. Eventually, a man and 2 women passed by. My friend told me to explain the situation to them. The whole time, the man at the bus stop had not stopped staring at me. When I approached the group and asked if I could walk with them, he suddenly started walking away. I was right. He had been waiting for me. I walked with the group for a bit, but they were turning left at the next red light, while I needed to go the other way. I thanked them for their help, but as soon as we parted ways, the man appeared again. I froze, completely terrified. Thankfully, the group noticed my reaction and ran back to me. The man saw them, turned around, and walked away. The group escorted me to my doorstep, and I thanked them profusely. To this day, I am convinced that he was planning something terrible. I will always be grateful to those 3 strangers who might have saved my life that night.
Story 9. The Dark Side.
I was supposed to meet up with a friend at a convention. He was going to get there early, as was I. So we agreed to meet up with the others later after having a wander around and catching up. I had known him for a few years. He was always a gentleman, waiting with me for late-night buses to make sure I was safe. I had been to his house, and he had always seemed trustworthy. However, when we met up at the convention, his behavior was different. Flirty, overly possessive, and increasingly irritated when I expressed how much I was looking forward to meeting up with the group. He insisted that this was a date. When he tried to playfully pressure me into admitting it, I firmly told him to back off. I made it clear that I had never given him any indication that this was anything more than friends catching up. I apologized if he had misunderstood. He responded by trying to guilt me, reminding me of the times he had kept me safe late at night, and saying that, as a solid guy, he deserved a chance. When he would not stop pestering me, I decided to leave. I did not want there to be tension in the group, and my instincts were screaming at me that something was off. Later, I learned he never met up with the group. Instead, he trapped a convention worker in a room and assaulted her, threatening to harm her if she made a sound. What horrified me even more was the discovery of what he had brought with him. A backpack that appeared to contain a premeditated kit, including a prop knife, condoms, duct tape, handcuffs, and other gear. I was sick to my stomach when I found out. What made it worse was that 2 of my closest friends defended him, blaming his actions on mental illness and saying he had just snapped. That excuse did not account for the premeditation evident in his actions. They even implied that it was my fault for rejecting him, suggesting that my decision to leave had somehow led to the assault. To this day, I question if I could have prevented it by alerting security. The guilt and horror linger, though I know the blame lies solely with him.
Story 10. The Eerie Car.
It was the day before my wedding, and I decided to take a walk around my peaceful neighborhood to clear my mind. The area was known for being safe, so I felt at ease with my headphones in and music playing loudly. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the quiet street lined with large houses and even larger plots of land. It felt serene. Until it didn't. About halfway down the street, I noticed a car parked ahead. It had been stationary for at least 5 minutes as I approached. Inside were 4, maybe 5 men, seemingly in their early 20s. They sat silently watching. My instincts told me something was off, but I dismissed it, brushing it aside as paranoia. I walked past, pretending not to notice them, and continued on my way. 50 feet later, an awful, primal feeling seized me, like a warning bell ringing deep within. I turned around, and my heart stopped. The car had crept forward, and was now just a few feet behind me. I hadn't heard it approach because of the music blaring in my headphones. The men inside were staring at me, their eyes cold and calculating. My hands trembled as fear gripped me. Desperation set in as I scanned my surroundings, searching for help. By sheer luck, I spotted an older man and woman working in their garden about 5 houses away. Without hesitation, I ran to them as fast as I could. Breathless and panicked, I explained what was happening. The older man wasted no time. He walked over to the car and demanded to know what they were doing. They claimed they were there for yard work, pointing to a house nearby. The man, however, was not convinced. He told them to leave immediately or he would call the police. The car lingered for a moment before speeding off. The man turned back to me, his expression serious. That house they pointed to, the owners are out of town, he said. My stomach churned as I realized just how close I had been to a much darker outcome. To this day, I feel chills when I think about that moment. If I had not listened to my gut, or if that couple had not been outside, I might not be here to share this story. What should have been a joyful day before my wedding could have turned into a nightmare.
Thanks for joining us on this terrifying adventure. If tonight's story gave you chills, let us know in the comments below and share your own scary experiences too. Don't forget to leave a like if you want more nightmares and subscribe if you haven't already. Until next time, sleep tight and remember, not all shadows are empty.